John MacKenzie, Far North Queensland's number one 4CA.
All right, I want to continue on this tone because we need to start arming ourselves with the information we need. You would have picked up on what's been announced this morning. We're topping the list now of stolen vehicles. New police data shows Cairns is the hardest hit area after it recorded more than 850 thefts over the last year. It's not just the thefts now. It's these carjackings as well. I mean, you might remember years ago when it started in South Africa, you'd stop at people stopping at the light. Suddenly you've got someone wrenching the door open, dragging, whether you're male or female, out by the scruff of your neck or your hair or whatever, being kicked a couple of times, they shoot through with the car. Well, that was thought to be South Africa. That'll never happen here. Really? The nation's ghost fell on southeast Queensland with 2 horrific carjackings in a 24-hour period, including a woman on the Gold Coast dragged from her car and bashed. A man in Bulimba threatened with an axe as thieves stole his car. I mean, this is South Africa revisited. And what's being done? What's being done to address this nightmare? It does say here, this is yesterday's Courier Mail, former veteran police detective turned Bond University criminologist Terry Goldsworthy said the recent spate of carjackings was no surprise because young offenders were becoming increasingly brazen. Dr Goldsworthy said, this is interesting, he said it's difficult to establish if carjackings were increasing because they might be hidden in police statistics for car theft and robbery. Now, we've really got to get across this, particularly females. I mean, the fact that these virtually vermin, if you like, drag this poor woman out of her car, bash her, and then shoot through with the car. This is the worst of the worst to me. So please, it's not a matter of being unnecessarily alarmed. It's getting the information we need to identify the level of risk out there and how to protect ourselves against it. I've got Dr Goldsworthy, Terry Goldsworthy on the line. He's been on this program before and he's just the person we need to talk to about these developments. He's an associate professor in criminology at Bond University. Terry, good morning.
Yeah, good morning.
We're top of the tree now, according to these figures today. Poor old Cairns with this huge number of stolen cars. Driving to work in the morning, and local pharmacist talking about yesterday, just going out to his training or whatever, and there's cars scattered along the sides of the highway. Some of them tipped over, some of them down over the edge at whatever, and there's so many now, it's hard to round them all up and get them off the roads. What on earth has gone wrong with Queensland?
Yeah, well, you're right. I mean, in terms of Cairns being the capital, I mean, if you have a look at the crime data released by the Queensland government, Cairns has had a 65% increase in the rate of stolen vehicles in the last 12-month period. So that far exceeds the closest competitor, I'm afraid you've got to say. So it's not really an honour you want, but certainly by and far you're leading the state. In terms of robberies, it's not much better for you up there. You know, robberies in Cairns increased by 38%. So it's problematic. And I think what we're seeing is, a government that doesn't really have any answers. I mean, in terms of youth crime, we've had the Premier say, well, no one can stop it. Now, I think that's a very interesting comment because no one's expecting her to stop all youth crime or crime in general. What we are expecting her to do, and the Commissioner, is to actually control it and reduce it and give us a plan on how we're going to do that.
Precisely. We are so fed up with, and particularly people who were the victims, so fed up with the situation. I mean, you can't blame the magistrates. It's not their fault. They have to follow a strict regimen when it comes to treating children. I mean, some of these thieves are 10 and 11 and 12 years of age. So, but the thing that annoys them is they're no sooner before the magistrate, they're out the door and they're around the corner and into another stolen car. Nothing. There are no consequences that are going to reduce the level of crime that they're involved in.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we know that in excess of 50% of young people who get placed on bail go on to reoffend whilst on bail. So 7% of them commit offences that result in death or serious injury.
Yes.
So it is a problem. But, I did another talkback show on another channel, radio, and last week, and it was looking at vigilantism. And, I said, well, you can't condone vigilante actions, but you can understand the frustration. And in a 20-minute conversation, I never once heard them refer, and I was on there with a couple of other academics, they never actually talked about the victims of crime. All they talked about was the offenders. And I think that's the key to where we're going wrong here, is that the victim of crime doesn't seem to feature in what we're doing and how we're responding, but it's all about the offender. And I understand that you need to try and stop the long-term offending. But in the short-term offending cycle, there needs to be far more consideration of what's happening to the victims of crime.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. That is so important. Lady yesterday, she loves Cairns. She's in the Cairns Post saying, I've always loved living here, but now I'm just not feeling safe in my own home. Now I just want to leave Cairns. I can't stay here any longer. And I'm wondering how widespread that feeling is becoming. It is so fundamentally unjust.
Well, we just had a council survey done in terms of how people, how safe they feel on the Gold Coast here, and the results are terrible. I think it was 70% don't feel safe in their own homes at night.
Yeah.
So that's problematic. I mean, perceptions of crime are just as debilitating as crime itself. Here in Queensland, we do actually have a crime problem. It's not just a perception. There is a serious crime problem in Queensland. And, honestly, you could hear the crickets in terms of how often we see the Commissioner come out to actually address this in a positive way, to say, well, this is what I am going to do, and this is how we are going to stop this.
That term crickets comes up regularly on this program. Can I just ask you, because you're in a position to be able to help us with this one, any number of people say, I've just come back from, Singapore, or I've just come back from Jakarta, or I've just come back from Tokyo, or whatever. And they say, do you know, you can walk down the street, a single woman, 3 o'clock in the morning, there's not a hint of any danger. There's no need for any fear because of the law and order strength they exhibit in those centres. Why can't we find out what they're doing right compared with what we're clearly doing wrong and change matters dramatically here?
Oh, look, you can always learn lessons from other law enforcement jurisdictions or criminal justice systems. I mean, Singapore's a much smaller geographic location than perhaps Queensland is, so there's some nuances there. But, this is what we should be seeing, the executive of the Queensland Police, the government searching out for best practice overseas. We really need to look at increasing maximum sentences as this political spin. I mean, we know from the data that youth offenders in particular don't get the maximum sentence. They never do in terms of unlawful use of motor vehicles and the like. So, maybe we need to look at having a very nuanced, very targeted and well-developed mandatory minimum sentencing for serious repeat offenders. We now legislate that in the Act. It's already there. It's decided on evidence by a magistrate. If someone's declared a serious repeat offender and they commit 3 certain offences that we can nominate in a certain period, then there's a minimum sentence, because that is something that will happen. The maximum sentence for stealing a motor vehicle will never occur to a youth offender. We've got 15 years of data that tells us that.
Yeah. Always good to talk to you, Terry. We'll stay in touch if that's all right with you.
Yep, that's fine.
Hope springs eternal. That's Dr Terry Goldsworthy, Associate Professor Criminology at Bond University.